Did you hear about Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker? Well, he was a star witness today on Capitol Hill. The governor was called to testify at a House hearing. Did it have something to do with his controversial collective bargaining law? Earlier today, Governor Walker went on the record. Governor, nice to see you.
Good to be here.
So why are you here in Washington?
Well, I testified in front of one of the committees of the House and the Congress and talked about the reforms we put in place, to balance our budget to make government work better, and they loved hearing about it.
All right, collective bargaining is probably the big issue that people think of with you. I'm just curious, if the collective bargaining goes through, and I realize it's hung up now in the court system, does this mean there'll be no layoffs for teachers?
Well, it depends on the school district. For those school districts that invoke those tools, you're at least not going to see massive layoffs. We can't guarantee every district that there's not one person out there, but the massive layoffs you've seen in other states across the country will be avoided because of these reforms. Right
now, it's hung up in the courts, so it's not in effect, right, the collective bargaining?
That's right. The law was signed. I signed the bill into law almost a month ago. The Circuit Court has held it up because of a technicality, but to me, it's not a matter of if, it's when it becomes the law, and that should be sometime soon, I believe.
And I take it you want it to happen soon.
Absolutely. The sooner we can do it, the sooner. We did this as part of a budget repair bill for the remainder of fiscal year 2011, which ends at the end of June. But we really did it to set it up for the next biennial budget. We faced a $3.6 billion deficit. This allows us from both state and local governments to save $1.7 billion. That more than offsets any cuts we have in spending to local governments as well.
All right. So explain to me, in light of that, is that, the big dispute in the court system is not giving enough notice to your opponents,
right,
essentially. Why don't you just run back in? You've got the state senators now in the states. You have your quorum. You've got the assemblies. You've got the House and the Assembly and the Senate, and you're going to sign it. Why not just go back into court and just do it? You could have it done in 3 days. The
belief from the lawmakers out there is inherently that what they did is legal, and that by backtracking on that somehow implies that they didn't. Every measure of the law, for any attorney I've found other than those working for the unions, believe, whether you agree with what the law is or not, they believe that what the state Senate did was legal and appropriate.
Well, but your hands are tied up in the meantime. I mean, you could be like 3 weeks into this by now. Had you done that, you now would have this tool that you think is so important.
A couple weeks in. Our great concern was, and for some reason if it went off until June or something like that, that'd be a different matter, and they'd have to consider bringing it up in the state budget, which is really the next spot we could act on it and realistically get it through. But in this case, if it gets resolved by the end of this week or next week, I think we're in good shape.
But then it goes to the Wisconsin Supreme Court.
Well, if the Circuit Court rules that it was legitimate, I think that Circuit Court judge, I'm an optimist, not a cynic like some. I think the judge knows that it's right, just wanted to not have to deal with it and was hoping the legislature would bring it up again. I think the law is pretty clear, and if the judge in the Circuit Court rules that way, we're in pretty good shape.
If you lose, you're going to go back in. If you lose in the Circuit Court, are you going to go back in immediately rather than waiting for the Supreme Court to act?
I think we'd have to look at that. I think the Supreme Court, again, there'd be pretty good standing here on the basis of the law, that the law was followed. People may interpret what they'd like to have, but that's not how you interpret the law. You interpret what's there in black and white. Black and white shows what they did was legitimate.
Everyone's got, not everyone, but a lot of people have eyes on 2012, what's going to happen, and the big question is Wisconsin's a swing state. I think people thought that with your election, that might mean that in 2012 would be a Republican state instead of a Democrat. It went for President Obama in 08. But in light of the collective bargaining, you've got the situation where Justice Prosser, who was about 30 points up right before this fight, now it's neck and neck, and there's still no resolution in the Supreme Court. Plus, your old seat, Milwaukee County Executive, has gone Democratic. Is that a statement that the Democrats have come back in your state?
No. I think this has always been a swing state. It's about as purple a state as you can get. In 2000, 2004, even in the gubernatorial election, the United States Senate election, each of those cases very close elections out there.
You've been painted as anti-labor, especially with this collective bargaining issue. There's also an ordinance coming out of Milwaukee in which a private ordinance said that private businesses, large and small, had to give a certain number of sick days per year. Right. 9 days if you're a large corporation, 5 or something if you're small. It is now there's a bill that's coming to you that says to essentially get rid of that ordinance. Are you anti-labor?
No, I'm pro-worker. I mean, what we're about is protecting jobs in the state, growing jobs. We just had great new job numbers come out that showed for the 3rd month in a row we've had rapid job growth, particularly in manufacturing. We did that because we changed the business climate in Wisconsin. We made it friendly for small businesses and employers, particularly for manufacturers. I want people to work. The best way
why get into that? Why get into that private dispute? The collective bargaining is about state employees. This is about private business in Milwaukee.
Two different things on the dispute in Milwaukee. It is clear. Milwaukee will become become an island and employers will move out of the city. And then something that I'm not saying, my former opponent in the gubernatorial election, Tom Barrett, the mayor of Milwaukee, raised the same concerns. He registered his opposition to the measure when it first came up. He asked for relief from the state legislature and from the state government. He, like the business community and others, recognize if they don't fix this, the side effect is not going to be people being granted more sick leave days. It's going to be fewer people having jobs in the city of Milwaukee. We can't afford to have anybody in the state of Wisconsin having fewer jobs.
Your testimony today, you referred to your budget as truly progressive.
In the best sense of the word.
I was going to ask, were you tweaking the progressives and were you tweaking Wisconsin history?
But it is progressive. I mean, you look at Tommy Thompson. I mean, think about.
Why do you use that word?
Well, I had fun with that. But
okay,
Tommy Thompson, you know, had welfare reform and education reform that led the country. I mean, think about Bill Clinton adopting welfare reform. That came because of Tommy Thompson and John Engler leading the way back in the 90s. We're pushing budgetary reform that ultimately is going to put more people to work in our state, because all this talk about the middle class from the labor unions, the reality is middle class taxpayers are the ones that get stuck with paying for more and more and more government. It's finally time somebody stood up and said, you know what, we got to draw the line on that. The middle class can't pay for it anymore, and so we're the ones protecting middle class workers and middle class taxpayers.
What do you think about your colleague, Congressman Paul Ryan, being seated yesterday in the front row and having the president sort of whack his plan?
You know, Paul Ryan, well, two things. One on Paul Ryan, one on the president. On Paul Ryan is one of the most politically courageous people I've ever seen in this U.S. Capitol, and I think it would serve us all well if Democrats and Republicans alike had more courage like him to move this country forward. You know, he's thinking about the next generation, not just the next election, and that's critically important in this time in our nation's history. When it comes to the president, you know, he stuck his nose in our battle over our budget deficit when obviously there's a much larger crisis at the federal level. I pointed out the second time he stuck his nose in our debate that obviously the president must know that federal employees other than postal workers do not have collective bargaining for wages and benefits, and they pay twice as much for their health insurance than what I'm asking for state and local employees. The president should focus on the facts and stop worrying about beating people up. You want to bring people together, put out a plan that has courage out there. You doesn't have to do the same plan as Paul Ryan, but at least have the courage to come out and defend your plan instead of attacking others.